Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Lowry. I am an IEP coach, an ADHD coach, and I have so much passion to help others who have children who suffer, um, not necessarily with the diagnosis of ADHD, but the areas of struggle that they have, and they don't have the support to make things work. Because I think in many ways ADHD is a gift, but certainly there are areas that do create struggles. And when our kids are in school, they do need support many times. So just to get started with housekeeping, save your questions to the end, and you're certainly welcome to write them in the chat at the end, and I'll be happy to answer them. Again, I just want to give you just a little bit of history of me, because I am a parent of many children actually with ADHD. How did I get started with this? Well, first, I am a pediatric RN. That was my background, professional background. I got married. I have 4 kids. My youngest, who currently is 26, is really the one that got me started in the advocacy role. So that started with advocacy from day one in the school, because he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, and he had the combined type of ADHD. So you know that that's very obvious. When a child has combined, the behavior shows up in the classroom, and there's no doubt that there's something going on. So I have been his advocate for a very long time. And during that period of time, I decided to become a volunteer for CHAD, Children and Adults with ADD, and did many, many conferences for them volunteer-wise. Then officially became an ADHD coach. I've done a lot of counseling and sessions with teens and school children with ADHD, as well as with parents of children, and then became an IEP coach, which I actually love the best, because I think the need is in the school system, and that's what I see all the time. The struggles in the school system that create so many problems with self-esteem and just accomplishing goals. So I have a lot of passion for this, and I also do have to brag that my son, who is the youngest, who got me into all of this, reaching out for him and others, just finished flight school. He is a private pilot. He is a certified flight instructor, and will gain his hours and eventually become a pilot for a commercial airline. And I talked to you about this because I want you to know that I didn't just read a book and learn about ADHD. I was all in for everything that went on in the school, in the behaviors and therapy and everything. So I truly do understand the need and understand your need as well. And I also want to just mention him too, because it just gives parents hope. You know, when you have a young child and you're struggling like I would have liked to hear somebody like me talk about this. It gives you hope that with support down the road, a child can be successful and find his passion. And I have to also say too, and as we go through this, you'll see this as well, many times schools just do not understand ADHD, and they believe that a child can eventually be mature and they should be able to fix all these behaviors. You know, once they're in middle school, they're old enough and they should be able to do what they need to do and knock off the behaviors. And so what I would like to say is, yeah, there is a level of maturity that has to happen. And our kids with ADHD, that doesn't happen for quite a while. Because remember, many are 2 to 3 years behind in their level of maturity anyway. So they may not mature till 25 to 30 fully. But I think during that period of time, once they mature, that ADHD is not going away like many school officials and teachers believe because of the maturity. That ADHD is still there, but I think what is happening is the maturity and the support early on and through those years lead to the ability to understand themselves and understand how they learn best and what kind of supports do they need in order to succeed. And that's what I think happens. And that has happened to my son as well. So that's just what I wanted to talk about as far as positivity. Did I go through a lot regarding behavioral issues? Yes, that's why this third part of my series to me is one of the most important parts, because it is everything to understanding and making sure that the school understands the necessity to understand the behavior is not going away until that child has support. And again, I said most sought after support. And that's what I see as an ADHD coach, as an IEP coach. This is the most sought after support. The behavioral issues in the school that create issues around all of the expectations that a child has. And like I just said, many believe in schools that once maturity hits, they should be able to control their behavior. And I remember one time having a client, a middle school client, or he may have been a freshman in high school. And the guidance counselor said, you are old enough now to be mature. You're old enough now to be organized and not have this kind of behavior. And that's pretty sad. And he told me that. And I was just really sad for him, because nothing could be farther from the truth. And if you don't have the tools to be organized or to control behavior, then you won't in many cases until you do. And the age has nothing to do with it. In addition, an average or above average IQ must also mean that a child can behave. That thought process, of course, is not correct as well. And the tough part too is when you have a child very bright. I mean, obviously our kids with ADHD are bright. They're either average, above average, or gifted. And I see sometimes that the kids who are gifted are put in those gifted classes, but the thought remains that if they're gifted, they should be able to handle all of these executive functioning skills, maintaining good behavior and listening skills. And again, that's not the case all the time. And a third area that I want to mention is those quiet behaviors, the inattentive presentation of ADHD, because there's the combined hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive ADHD, just the impulsive, hyperactive alone, the combination, and this, where you may have just a presentation of inattentive ADHD, which is sometimes even harder to diagnose or even to realize, because you're not having outward hyperactivity and impulsivity and interruptions and those kinds of things. But at the same time, you still are going to have behaviors that indicate that a child can't use executive functioning skills or pay attention. And that's what I'm saying here, where a child appears to ignore directions. And many times that's what it's thought of. The child's ignoring the directions, not focusing, not persisting, not showing the use of executive functioning skills. And that must be intentional, because otherwise, what can it be? And that's another wrong situation, because those kids with the inattentive ADHD presentation can have the same struggles as a child who is outwardly impulsive and hyperactive. So what could be happening here? So many things could be happening here. Maybe your child has been, obviously maybe not with a sign, but it could be that all of the executive functioning skills that I'm talking about, he didn't understand the assignment. He couldn't take notes on the assignment because he can't process language as fast as he should be able to keep up with the teacher. The executive functioning skill of initiations, just starting, like knowing where to start, how to start, he could be having trouble with that. he could have started late and didn't understand how to organize himself for possibly a project. So maybe a project that should have lasted 5 days is starting the night before. Could be another one. I'm sure all of you can come up with your own thoughts regarding that as well. You may be trying to study for an exam that again should have been happening over a period of 3 days and we didn't. So these are the things that we as parents are aware of and need help from the school. So again, I like to go over this because it just reinforces that ADHD is a medical diagnosis. And again, I really think that a lot of people miss that, especially when you're looking at that core symptom of behavior. It just doesn't seem like that could be a medical diagnosis, right, of ADHD, and it truly is. And that's why I bring up an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, lack of neurotransmitters, and those are those transmitters that go between the nerve synapses that create the need for paying attention, create the ability for paying attention. The executive functions needed for effective cognitive functions arise from the prefrontal cortex that is underdeveloped as well as understimulated. And then just like I've been mentioning, the executive functionings that are not really are invisible, but are there include working memory. And working memory, if you don't know, that's kind of hard to explain, but I think the best example that I've come up with is like a math example where there's multiple steps in a certain problem and you have to be able to hold things in your head to get to the next step. And I think you could apply working memory to any subject for that matter, keeping material in your head to go on to the next. And that's very difficult for many of our kids to do that. Initiation, like I said, just initiating a task or a project. Focus, which probably you're well aware of. Focus, especially when it's something that they don't understand or they don't like. Sustaining attention, another one. Emotional regulation isn't thought about too much, but certainly that is a big part of ADHD symptoms. Planning, problem solving, time management, another big one for so many. And again, not every child with ADHD has all of these executive function deficits. They may have a handful. They don't have all of them. They might, but they don't necessarily have all of them. And again, as you can imagine, these are the things that create trouble in the classroom. So I wanted to relate some of those things to the classroom. And it kind of goes along with that picture of that child who was saying help. Organization impacts missed assignments and late projects. Working memory impacts multi-step directions, reading, math, memorizing. Again, you're holding information in your head, spelling, comprehension. And comprehension, side note, is an important aspect to pay attention to. When your child is evaluated by the school, your school may say, based on the data, your child does not have a learning disability. And up to 50% of kids with ADHD do have some form of learning disability. So that's an important fact. If it's decided that there's no learning disability, pay attention to the comprehension piece anyway, because there's many subdivisions of these testing, and you will see certain areas that indicate difficulty in working memory, in processing. Some of those scores will be lower than the other scores, although if you average everything up, they come up as average. So it doesn't really, if you're not paying attention to the individual scores, you wouldn't know that. But I see that a lot, this comprehension piece, and it could be related to just the processing piece of being able to pay attention and listen and keep up with what is being said. So it's just something to pay attention to, regardless of whether a child has a learning disability or not. Planning, another big one, big time impacting projects and homework. And this is one of the reasons too that some kids aren't even diagnosed young. They're diagnosed when they're in middle school or high school because they now have multiple teachers with multiple expectations, multiple assignments. That is real tough for a child who's having trouble with organization and planning and time management. Difficulty learning from the past, that's another big one too. You would think, right, if a person, a child hands something in late because of some of these difficulties, learning from the past might be, well, next time I'm going to start this sooner. That's not necessarily going to happen. And again, if they don't have a toolbox, they don't have tools to use anyway. Processing language, and I mentioned that before, big one in the classroom, taking notes, following along, determining the needed questions to content. You know, and I think that's a really big one too. A child may appear that they understand, or it may be assumed that they understand because they're not asking questions. The problem again with that is, what is the question that I need to ask to get more understanding of the content? That can be pretty tough. So, unfortunately, all of the above just continues to reinforce perceived negative behavior. Because you know that if things aren't going well at school, then there's negativity happening. They know they're not measuring up and they're feeling bad about themselves. And that continues with negative behavior. And this is the vicious circle that I'm talking about. Frustration and anger because they know. Our kids with ADHD are very intuitive. Low self-esteem with negative behaviors, refusals, boredom, acting out, and along with the existing hyperactivity and impulsivity. So you already have symptoms of ADHD, and now you have low self-esteem. And, you know, who's going to want to do what is told to them they need to do if they feel like a failure or they feel like they don't have the ability to do it? And if they're being told that they can do it, they're old enough to do it, they're mature enough to do it, they wonder, gee, I mean, if that's the case, what's wrong with me that I can't do it? And that's a real tough situation. And that's not acceptable. And again, inattentive behaviors look like intentional. You don't have that impulsivity, hyperactivity kinds of behaviors in the classroom. You have more of a quiet situation where a child's not paying attention. It looks intentional. All resulting in punitive reactions like the loss of academic points, the loss of recess, which is the last thing that they need, the embarrassment in front of peers, suspensions, and lack of faith, free and appropriate public education. And the negative behaviors and low self-esteem become reinforced. So now you have this vicious circle of feeling bad about yourself, not having the tools to work on what you need. The expectation of the school is that you can because you're mature enough, and you begin to feel worse about yourself because you can't. Oops, sorry. So this is what you could be facing, because kids many times who have behaviors and they are worsening face suspensions. And if a child has a disability as ADHD, they can't be suspended beyond 10 days without a manifestation meeting, which means that a meeting is put in place to determine whether or not the behavior is linked to the disability. Now, the magic number is 10. I wouldn't want to let that happen 10 times, but that's what the law says. But you would want to stop that sooner than 10 days, of course. So once that is decided that the behavior could be related to the disability, the following would be an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment. And that is done by an experienced clinician, a psychologist, psychiatrist, who evaluates behaviors in various environments within the school. Now, the school may not have this person who has experience in this, and they have to outsource, but that's okay. So that's something that could happen. Now, that may be because your child could have an IEP in place and perhaps even has a behavior plan in place. But if it's determined that it's being followed, and that's the other question mark, is that behavior plan being followed if it exists? And if it's not being followed, then that is another issue. If it is being followed, it's clearly not working. And so that's where an FBA might come in either way to determine what kind of triggers are happening in various environments of the school that we can look at to see what's really going on to support this behavior, and not support the behavior, but support this child. And that would lead to a positive behavior plan. I think too, important to know is before a manifestation meeting, of course, the question then is, if your child has a behavior plan in place and you have all these behaviors, it's easy for the school to say, well, there's a behavior plan in place. I don't know what the problem is. And this is why it's so important to have communication and data. If you have that in place and you know that this data is coming out as it's negative because this thing in the behavior plan is not working and there needs to be some tweaking, or you find out that 2 or 3 classes that the child takes, the behavior plan is not being used. So a lot of that is super important to be aware of. And then going to the functional behavioral assessment also to determine what's triggering that child. And again, the behavior plan in place may have been working. And maybe it's a year down the road, and there's other expectations that are on that child. That child has grown. Things have changed in his life. Who knows? It could be a million different things, but the bottom line is, whether it's in place or not, it's not working, and we need to figure out why. So again, as a result of an FBA, an individualized behavior plan becomes a part of the IEP. And just like I said, and if the communication was not in existence prior to all of this, now you want to make sure that it is part of it. To set up communication between school and home to consistently evaluate for effectiveness, data to support that. That is just so important to make sure that everything is in place and that you set up, and even in the beginning, you might want to set up communication weekly. And there should be a designated person with whom you're going to speak with. And how is that communication going to take place? So I just wanted to bring out the IDEA, which is the special ed law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, states that the schools must consider strategies, including positive behavior interventions, strategies, and supports to address behaviors. So it is talked about in IDEA, and it needs to be addressed if your child is struggling with behavior. And I wanted to bring up this too. When is FAPE denied? When the school is refusing to do an FBA despite the data indicating the need. That child is not getting a free and appropriate public education. And that's contrary to what special ed law states. When the lack of skills, as per the data, relates to behavior and there is a lack of evaluations. When parents are called to school to pick up their child, and I'm sure many of you may have faced that, that is not providing a child FAPE if you have to keep interrupting his day and picking him up. That's certainly, even prior to a suspension, would be a red flag to ask for a manifestation meeting, because obviously there's something going on, rather than continue to pick this child up. Multiple suspensions without an IEP in place. So exactly, there could be, I was speaking about suspensions with an IEP in place and possibly a behavior plan in place, but maybe this child has nothing in place. Maybe this child hasn't even had a diagnosis yet, or has had one, but hasn't had an IEP in place, because many times the thought process can be an ADHD shouldn't require an IEP. But you don't know. That's not true across the board. So again, that would indicate that possibly there needs to be a psychoeducational evaluation to determine not only is this child maybe struggling with behavior, but again, as I've tried to show you, everything can impact behavior. And what is impacting this behavior? Maybe a learning disability, or maybe just issues with processing language and working memory that's impacting his educational access that needs to be addressed. So that's just really important to remember that. It is, these behaviors are happening for a reason, and they have many reasons that could be in place, and it has to be determined what reasons there are. And oh, and also, side note, I meant to mention, during these suspensions, that's another issue. These kids who have been suspended are still supposed to have the IEP in place for free and appropriate public education. They can't just be suspended and not have education related to the IEP. And I know that doesn't happen. Another big one, and I tried to instill this in my son, and I have to say that I wish I had done it earlier than I even did. I think it's a huge deal, because we know that our kids with ADHD are bright, and they're intuitive, and they're sensitive, and they do need to understand their strengths and weaknesses. They do need to understand that they can be successful, and that they have the right to ask for help and be supported. And that is how my son survived when he got through 4 years of college with a coach, and he got through flight school with no coach. So he, over the years, matured, that he also learned about himself and learned how he learns. He still has pretty significant ADHD, but he learned how to educate himself in the way that it works for him. He learned that he can't just sit down for an hour and read. It just doesn't happen. So I think that if you instill the self-advocacy, which comes from you as a parent advocating for that child knows that it's important to understand himself and knows that it's okay to ask for help. And like I said here, they need to learn how they learn best and put all of it in action. They always need to maintain a healthy self-esteem and know they can advocate for what they need. And the self-esteem is not going to be healthy if they don't ask for what they need. And they get all of that from you, the parent, who advocates in a positive way, knowing that their child is smart and capable. And again, I've had clients in the past, and it's difficult when you're trying to teach your child that you have the right to ask questions, because sometimes that may not be received well. So it's just a process of teaching your child that they do have the right to ask and be supported. If they decide that it doesn't appear that a 504 and an IEP that's in place is being followed, and they need those accommodations, they have the right to mention that and be supported. Now, obviously, when they're really young, you're not going to do that, but I don't think it's really, you shouldn't wait till they're in middle school, to instill that, I think. And I didn't do that early enough. And I think it's a good idea too. So I just listed some key takeaways. Again, this ADHD, remember, there's the hyperactive impulsive ADHD, there's the hyperactive impulsive and inattentive, all three wrapped into one combined, and there's the inattentive ADHD, all called ADHD. So the key takeaways that I want to leave is the one is behaviors as a result of a medical diagnosis of ADHD are not intentional. The lack of skills and the comorbid conditions can promote negative behaviors. And I haven't mentioned comorbid conditions. A high percentage of kids with ADHD do have one comorbid condition at least, and they can be anxiety, which obviously from everything I'm talking about, you have a baseline of anxiety. It certainly is not going to get better if you're not successful in school. But anxiety is one, depression is one, bipolar is one. Those are big ones that could be in place. Depression, I think I mentioned that. How behaviors are managed can promote negativity, as I said. If it's all punitive in the school regarding not completed assignments, any kinds of the behaviors that are issued that are punished regarding, not having recess or staying after school or something like that. It's all negativity. It's a huge deal to reinforce the positive and not the negative for our kids with ADHD. Because honestly, promoting those negative behaviors will only create more negativity and low self-esteem. An inattentive presentation of ADHD can appear as intentional negative behaviors, as I had said before. All highlighting the importance of evaluations. And again, your child might have ADHD, but not have been tested for a learning disability. And maybe as you collect some data based on maybe how they're functioning in a classroom, it might be important to have those evaluations to make sure they don't have a learning disability and they need to be supported for that. IDEA special ed law mandates positive behavioral interventions. No child is intentionally misbehaving. What child on a daily basis is going to have those kinds of behaviors and negativity thrown in their face and be okay with that? Remember, our kids with ADHD are individuals first, and that's another big thing. And a child with ADHD is the child first, and then the ADHD symptoms are a part of that child, and it's an individual situation in that case as well. Before I take any questions, I just wanted to introduce a masterclass that I have worked on and will be available, and to explain a little bit about what that is. And again, it just comes from my passion to help others with children with ADHD and to have a safe environment for that. Because I understand too that there are many parents who don't have kids with ADHD who don't understand it. And they look at you, the parent, as the problem because your child is acting like that. And I've been looked at that as well. And I know that feeling. And so the safe space for, I think, for parents with kids with ADHD is with other parents with kids with ADHD, who can support each other and answer questions, especially for younger parents who are just getting into it and don't understand any of it. It's just something that I wish I had something like that to go to early on as well. So the part of the parts of the master class include 10. Right now, there are 10 courses available, and I'll be adding more to them. On-demand video courses, so you can look at them whenever you have time, which makes it kind of easy, and to help and they all help to advocate, and that's the big word, advocate for your child. As a paying member, you'll get exclusive access to new masterclass courses that I'll be adding. The Facebook group, there will be a private Facebook group for just those who have signed up for my masterclass. And again, that is what I'm speaking about when I'm talking about supporting each other and me supporting all of you. And then finally, live monthly Zoom coaching calls, exclusive access to my live bi-weekly Zoom coaching. Will cover a variety of topics. And I think what I would do is ask for ideas and needs that the parents in the group have to talk about that. You know, in the situation, I would schedule some things that I think are important or things that come up, but certainly that input can come from the parents as well. What you want to talk about among each other. And again, just to explain a little bit about the masterclass, a little bit about the videos that I have, the courses that I have, how the law protects the civil rights of all children with ADHD, the differences between the 504 and an IEP, and the criteria to receive each one of them, the difference between accommodations and modifications, the description of procedural safeguards that many parents don't realize they have, the process of evaluation, key elements in the IEP and how they affect support, and how the parent is an integral part of the team. It doesn't feel like that. Sometimes when you're in IEP meeting, you don't really feel like that, but you really are. And the IDEA, special ed law, does promote that. Parents are very important to this process. So it's important for you to realize that. And as you see on the bottom is my link to join. And the price is $87 a year for all of what I just talked about, for the support among your peers and me, as well as going over different topics that are of interest, and things are always changing, of course, and having access to all of the courses that will be added to, and having a private Facebook group where you can come and chat with one another. And again, this link is where you can come to sign up for my masterclass. So I wanted to see if you guys had any questions. So a question is, my son is 11. He sometimes has behavior in school, which makes me nervous that one day he will be suspended. Where can I learn about the laws surrounding suspension for my son that has an IEP, or that had an I guess your son has an IEP now? I guess the question then I would have is, you apparently have been communicated with regarding that behavior. And so I think that that is something that would require a meeting with the school to talk about exactly what is happening, you know, when the behavior happens, and talk about a possible need for a behavior plan. As far as the laws, the laws, whenever you have an IEP, you should get a procedural safeguard book from the child study team. And all of those talk about your rights in that book. But speaking individually here, I would say that it would be really important to find out what exactly is happening and triggers that are happening perhaps, and where the behavior is happening, and really be aware of whether or not the IEP is even being followed. Is this just something that's creating frustration or not? Does anybody else have a question? I'll type in how you can sign up for my masterclass. A second question, what kind of behavior should we look for to request an FBA? My son's teachers generally tell me he is well behaved, but can sometimes ask me to speak with my son about being focused or staying on task. Well, I guess any behaviors that, well, outright behaviors, apparently he's not showing those. So he's showing behaviors that are more inattentive type behaviors that are not impacting the classroom. But the teacher is noticing that. And I guess my question would be, if that child is having trouble with focus or staying on task, is he being cued at all in the classroom to help him with that? Is he getting any kind of breaks to help him with that? Does this child have an IEP with or a 504 with accommodations regarding the need to stay focused and stay on task? So those aren't bad behaviors. Those are behaviors that are impacting his success. So the FBA probably in this case wouldn't necessarily be, I don't know. I always think about FBAs more of the outright, behaviors that are creating havoc in the classroom or something like that. But certainly, if it wasn't successful by just having that IEP in place and following it, or adding accommodations that the child study team and the teacher think would be helpful to help them stay focused, an FBA could possibly work. Maybe it's a certain class that he has, or maybe there's he's not understanding something, so he's not being persistent and focused. That could be it too. There could be so many reasons that may or may not require an FBA. So I guess my question would be, does he have an IEP? And is it being followed, and what's in it? And how can we increase the focus? And is the focus and staying on task impacting his success with the topic, the subject? Are his grades being impacted by that? Is it a learning difference? Or is it just part of the symptoms of ADHD? And that's why I think ADHD is a pretty complicated disability, because it can be a lot of different things. So I'm not really giving you a direct answer because I have a lot of questions. But I think the first thing I would do, if your child does not have an IEP, I just would want him evaluated, because such a high percentage of kids have learning disabilities, and this could be part of it. And I don't know all of the data that we're looking at. If he does have an IEP, then, is it being followed? And what is in place to help him stay focused? So that's what I would suggest. What can I do if the data the school provides proving that they follow my son's behavior plan doesn't reflect what my son says? Oh, that's a good question. I guess, I don't know if you have had a meeting with your child study team. Um, but I think that is what I would do first, have a direct meeting with them. And be specific, ask the school for specifics regarding how that behavior plan is followed and compare it to what your son is saying. I mean, I don't have enough detail to fully answer the question, I guess. Apparently what you're telling me then is that your son is saying that it's not being followed, and that's important information. So either it's not being followed, if he doesn't believe it is, or if he thinks there should be something in it that's not, perhaps. I guess the school is providing data, so they're not having any kind of behavioral problems based on your question. So I guess my concern would be your son, and what is he saying by saying that it's not being followed? What is really happening? That's an interesting question. I've never come across that before, where um, the behavior plan is being followed as per the school, but your son is saying that it's not. So I guess it really is a matter of taking apart that behavior plan and trying to figure out uh, what he believes is not being followed and communicating that to the school. Or maybe the behavior plan needs to be revised as well. If he is showing some kind of frustration, then maybe you don't have a whole story as to how the school is following it and what is being said to him. And you need to know that. That's what I would say. Anybody else have any questions or any follow-ups from anybody who has asked questions? It's a very difficult, it's a very complicated diagnosis, I think. I think there are parts of a child with ADHD who can be very successful because they have the ability many times to hyper focus on what they like. Um, but it's also very complicated, especially when you have a school-age child, when you have the symptoms of ADHD. Plus, you may have one or two comorbid conditions. Plus, you might have, and one of them is a learning disability, and the percentage of kids with ADHD who have learning disabilities is pretty high. So that can also, again, come out as behavior, because the child has a learning disability that nobody knows about. This has come up in high school, ninth grader this year. He has an IEP and does have positive reinforcement as part of his accommodations, but some teachers see his inattentive as a bad behavior. Well, that's a shame. They need to know that that's not true. I don't even, what happens then as a result of their belief that he has bad behavior. I mean, even if a child didn't have ADHD, I guess the question is, what is the definition of inattentive leading to bad behavior? What is it a teacher is seeing that has made him or her decide that that child is inattentive? So many people can be listening and not appear to be, but if the end result is success, then he must have been listening. So I guess I would have questions around why a teacher would say that. And they don't fully have an understanding of ADHD. So I think it would be important for you to communicate that to the child study team. You don't always need a meeting, but sometimes when it's something like this, I think we do, because an IEP meeting would include a gen ed teacher. And I think that there has to be a change in that, the understanding of a child who's an inattentive. And if a child is being successful, unless you're not being told that he isn't, why would there be an assumption that it's bad behavior? So I think you have a lot of questions that you need to ask the child study team in a meeting. And it is your expectation that teachers better understand his ADHD and that it is not bad behavior, because that is only going to lead to more negativity for him. If their reaction to their belief comes out in a punitive way, that's not what you want. And if they truly believe that it's bad behavior, then they probably are acting in a negative way. And you can't have that. So again, my answer would be, I would definitely call a meeting and get it ironed out as to what's really going on. The problem with our kids with ADHD, and probably a lot of kids, but especially kids with ADHD, they may have experienced some negativity during their school day and they just don't want to think about it anymore. They come home and they don't talk about it. Or they truly forget. They just forget because they receive, I have to look that up. There was a stat that the amount of negative data coming our kids' way is pretty predominant in school many times if they're struggling. So they're just so used to negative comments and behaviors that they just don't even think about the specifics by the time they get home to explain it. So I think this needs to come to a meeting to discuss it. That's what I think. Because that is exactly what I was saying. I'm trying to find another school for my son, and he is not being accepted because of his ADHD, even in a school specialized in ADHD. Oh, that's the school specializes in ADHD and it's not accepted. That seems odd. Why would that be? If they truly specialize in ADHD. I can't imagine why that is. I think we need to ask that question. Maybe he has had some behavioral issues in the past that are documented in his records. You should be able to get his records as his parent, find out what's in those records, because maybe that's what it is. There's something in the records that are, and that shouldn't even change anything. If you specialize in ADHD and this is a kid who's had past difficulty with behaviors, that shouldn't change anything if they specialize in it, right? But if they're just picking certain kids out that they want to teach, then that's concerning. But again, I'm not so sure that you would want that school if that's how they're acting. And I guess my other question would be why you're trying to find another school. Because the school is not doing their job, I guess, which is a shame. But again, I guess I would ask them more details around that. Doesn't make that makes no sense. Great. Norma's going to be setting up a meeting for her 9th grader who is seen as having bad behavior because he's inattentive. That's great. If you need any help with that, let me know. I think sometimes we as parents forget or just don't think of ourselves as part of a team. And we think that we have to listen to what is being handed to us from the school. And also, many times I've seen there's this degree of feeling bad as a parent that you have created some of this. And so you just listen to the school and you're not as proactive because you're not sure if you can be or should be. And I see that all the time, and I went through that myself. But you can advocate and not let anyone ever create a negative environment for your child because they don't understand ADHD. And I think we've come a long ways understanding ADHD, but we sure have a long ways to go. And I don't know if we'll ever get there without parents being aware of their rights and ability to advocate for their children to make it happen for them. Because it's tough. And I get it. Like, you don't understand and you have a child with behavioral issues. We as human beings, I guess, believe that behaviors are intentional, and if they really wanted to stop their behaviors, they would. And yeah, behaviors should not be allowed that are negative. But if behaviors are happening because of triggers that no one is aware of, then they have to be looked at and they have to be supported. These kids are not neurotypical. They're not neurotypical. They have ADHD. It's a whole different ballgame. And they can't be looked at that in that way. And so I've been in plenty of meetings with as an advocate for my own son, because he has combined ADHD, and he was a handful. But you have the right as a parent to make sure he or she is protected and supported, because it means everything as they get older and begin to learn more about themselves and try to find their passion to be successful. Anybody else? I think as your child gets older, I'm sure you have all sorts of different age groups, but you come across different difficulties as you go from grade to grade. So things change. Just remember that the IEP is fluid, can change multiple times, even within a year. Never think that you can set up an IEP and you have to live with it from September to May, because that's not true at all. If that IEP is not working, the behavior plan is not working, then you need to make changes and make it work. So if you don't have any other questions, I think I will end this webinar, and please know that if you have any questions that come up, at any time, you can email me. You can email me. If you think of a question later, I'll be happy to answer. And again, please consider joining my masterclass. A lot to offer for $87 a year. And I would like to be able to help as many people as I can. So again, thank you for coming tonight. I hope you learned a little bit. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.